The reason why we get so anxious when we speak in front of a group is we feel the sensation of the eyes watching us. We feel very exposed, which is exactly not what you want to be doing. What you want to be doing is focusing on them. And you are actually not important. You're there to give them the information. They're the ones who actually need to do something with the information.
So my guest today, Sarah spent the last 15 years coaching global executives in a dozen industries, whether preparing for a keynote address, briefing senior officials, or pitching a product, which, again, if you're an entrepreneur, you pitch every single day, especially if you're online. So pay attention, please. Sarah helps leaders find their core message and make that message stick. Sarah works with executives in Fortune 50 companies, government agencies, nonprofit organizations. Her clients include Microsoft, small companies, all right, it doesn't really, U.S. Department of Defense, again, super small companies that no one's ever heard of. Sarah's a professor, at the communications at the, how do you say this?
McDonough, it's the Georgetown McDonough School of Business. It's their business
Okay,
school.
basically, you're fancy and you know what you're doing. All right, so let's just get into it, all right? So first and foremost, again, thank you for joining the podcast. And I love having people that do public speaking on the podcast. Recently, we had somebody named Nathan Gold come on. And the reason for that is because, yes, a lot of coaches and consultants that I meet with, and whether we work with them in the agency or whatever, they have a goal of speaking on stage. Like, that is the goal. Yes, they want to coach and whatever, but they view themselves as a keynote speaker one day. So that's number one. Number two, though, is every day, like I mentioned before, when you're online, you're presenting, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if there's an audience of 0 people because you're just on a webcam somewhere or whatever. Or again, you're doing an IG live with 1,000 people. Or again, you're a high-level CEO pitching your next strategy to the board. Like, that's a pitch. That is a presentation. So the first question I have for you actually is I want to know about Sarah's journey. How do you become this coach for presenters? How did you get here?
So that's a great question, and I my answer seems to change over the years because you think a little bit more about your life and how you got to where you got. So I've always loved theater, and when I was in high school and college, I did a lot of theater. Never was particularly great at it, so never wanted to do it professionally. Like, I was okay, I was an amateur, but it was just where I had the most fun was whenever I was involved in a play, directing plays, acting in plays. So essentially, I had a totally different career as an educator, and I happened to be in a play when I was, also teaching in a classroom. And it turned out, as a community theater, it turned out the director of the play, on the side, that was his side job, right? But what he really did was he ran this very successful communications training, public speaking training company. And I never knew that was like something that you could get paid for. And it hit me that like, that's what I wanted to do with my life. It's like, I want to help people communicate better. I want to take what I do in theater and bring it to the corporate world. And so I built my business from scratch from there. And so that's sort of the linear path, I would say. But I think deep down, I always, I have a pet peeve when I'm sitting through a boring presentation or a boring class or any time where you feel a little bit like a prisoner listening to someone speak. And it's always like really gotten to me. And so I think I had this like desire to stop people from doing that.
Yeah.
So that
Isn't
was
it
there.
fascinating though that like there's always this person when it comes to the journey, right, of becoming a consultant or just any entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I think there's this moment of exposure. Like you're like, oh wait, I can do that? Like that's an option?
Yeah.
My first inkling of even doing anything in consulting or coaching was a consultant that came to my company I was working for, and I was a, salesperson, whatever. And I was managing teams, and he came in and taught us all how to coach. These all, to me, it was basic stuff. So I had a sports background, whatever. But I remember watching him and everyone going, and I was like, these are basic concepts to coaching, but this guy get paid millions of dollars to be here. And a light bulb went off, and I was like, wait, you could do this? So it's fascinating to hear other people's like aha moments for doing stuff like this.
Right, because like I would imagine with coaching, you could be like a little league coach. You could coach your kids like second grade soccer team. And the same skills that are needed there, where you're doing it for free and you're working with kids, you can get paid lots and lots of money to do it for a company and to help leaders. So totally hear you on that.
Yeah. So then on the presenting side, one of the first things I wanted to ask is why is it so hard to present, number one, and why is it so difficult to have an inspiring presentation? Because I think, to your point, I've seen in the corporate space especially, right? Like you sit in these day-long meetings, everyone's kind of talking about their side of the house and what's going on and what's coming in the next year, and the whole time you're just like, I'm about to pass out. I am so tired. This is so boring. So why is it so difficult to do those two things? To obviously, one, present, but then two, actually have an inspiring presentation that actually gets people to take action.
Right. So first of all, why is it so difficult, right? And I think I'm going to answer that in terms of the anxiety that surrounds it, and then I'll get to the inspiring and how not to bore people in a second. So why are people so anxious when it comes to speaking and presenting? Why is it so hard, right? It shouldn't be this difficult. And I think it's just this really universal phenomenon that there's something about presenting in front of an audience. There's something about speaking in front of a group of people that makes people feel very exposed, and it makes people feel threatened. And it I have this whole theory that it goes back to when we lived in caves, and people would step out of the cave back then, and they would have this primal experience of being watched by predators who were literally going to eat them. Mm-hmm. And so there's something about when you get up in front of an audience, your brain tells you these are the predators and they're going to eat you, and you have to protect yourself from the predators. And so your brain goes into that fight or flight mode, and that's why people have so many jitters and butterflies and panic, symptoms of real panic before they get up in front of the audience, because their brain is telling them it's a scary experience. So I can tell you later how I help people get over that, but I think that's the core of the anxiety. But then there's the question of why is it so difficult? Your second question is like, why is it so difficult to engage people or inspire people when you're presenting? Mm-hmm. And if you think about when you're really watching something that's interesting and gripping, right, is like when you're watching a movie or a TV show, and think about the difference of when you're watching a good movie and watching a presentation, right? Nothing could be more different, right? Right? That you're like, and what's the difference is that a movie or an action movie or any movie is telling you a story, and it's bringing you in to the drama of the story. There's intrigue, there's surprise, there's like some sort of a conflict, and it's scary and it's fun and it's funny and it's dramatic and it's going somewhere, right? And like, of course you want to know like what happens in the movie, right? That's what happens. And then when you're watching a presentation, all of that suddenly flattens and you're just being the recipient of information, right? The presentation, people somehow think that a presentation is like its own form of communication that's designed to tell them what you're going to tell them, give them the information, and then tell them what you told them. It's designed to just deliver information. And our brains are not designed to just receive information. We don't receive information like that. We tune out. Yeah. And so the key to inspiring people is to turn your presentation into a story, is to make it more like the movie. And that doesn't mean you have to somehow invent drama where there is none, right? There is action in a presentation. You just have to find it, because the information that you're delivering somebody is the answer to a problem. It's the solution to a problem. And so if you get people intrigued about the problem and feeling the pain of the problem first, then they want to know, how are you going to solve that problem? And then you're going to give them like, this is how you solve it. And then they're going to say, but what if this happens? What if it doesn't work? And then you're going to say, well, then we'll do it this way. And so you're constantly moving up from what I call tension to redemption till you get to the final like resolution at the end. And it's more like the movie.
Yeah, and because also we're natural storytellers. Like our entire existence as humans is storytelling, and so it makes sense that like we hate presentations and PowerPoints, because it's like that's the opposite of what we've been doing for like ever. And it's also probably no surprise to people that like, look, you have to tell a great story in order, because like let's face it, they're not going to remember the information. Like when I think back to like my history class in high school, I can't remember any of the dates of
Right.
things that happened. I remember the stories though, and the
Right.
lessons within them. And that's what matters most, right? And if I can get
Right.
you in a presentation to even be emotionally invested in the story, then maybe you actually will help me come up with other ideas. You'll treat the new mission or the new strategy as your own, I would imagine, and now you actually have people actually executing on it better.
And they remember the information, right?
Hmm.
The beauty of it is that if you can take your information, turn it into a story, the outcome is that people will remember the information. They won't just remember the story. Like that's the beauty of it, right? So
Are
because you need
you?
them to remember the information. You need
Yeah.
them
Are
to
you?
remember like the that's why you're giving the presentation.
Yeah. Are you surprised at all by like how? Because this is pretty obvious, and I think most people know this, but we're lazy. It's like I could just do the presentation's easier. Like, are you surprised by like it's again how many other CEOs, how many leaders of departments, right? If they actually did a better presentation, would have better outcomes for their company. They know. I feel like they know this, but yet they're like, it's just easier for me to just do a PowerPoint. Like, do you feel like they know that they're taking the easy way out and it's not effective, or do you feel like they actually have no idea?
I think it's a mixed answer. I think that the culture for a lot of organizations is not to think of presentations as storytelling because they want them to have gravitas and really like be able to deliver very complex data and they don't they separate, understandably they're separating like a Marvel movie from their presentation on the data science or whatever it is, right?
Hmm.
So I think that that's part of it, but I also think that it's easier said than done. Like I think it's when you have so much information to convey, even if you want to turn it into a story, it's hard to do that
Hmm.
because it's not easy to tell a good story.
Yeah.
You have to somehow, especially when you're in the. This is like why they hire outside consultants, right? Is because when you're in the information and you live it day to day, it's hard to step outside the information and become the writer and see, oh, there's a story here.
Yeah.
That's actually very difficult to do. And sometimes you just need someone on the outside to coach you on how to do that.
So for you, I mean, you worked with tons of different, industries and things like that. How important is it for you to understand the data before you help them write the story? Like I would imagine, because even for me, like we have this podcast agency, right? And so we help, coaches and consultants develop their own podcasts.
Yeah.
And for me, I personally have to get involved. Like I have to understand the offer. I have to understand the brand purpose. I have to like get in the head of that person. So I've on accident, I've learned a lot about drastically different things. Like one of our, people, for example, is like an energy healer. Like I just like, and then another
You didn't
person
know
is
about
like,
that. Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
all over the place. It's like, but for you, how important is it for you to get involved in the company to understand kind of the message before you create the story?
So it's it's important for me to understand certain questions, right? And then there's certain questions I'll ask people about what the problem is they're solving and why it's a difficult problem and what are the challenges they're facing and how do they overcome those challenges and what does the world look like if their problem is solved and who's their competition and how are you different from your competition. Like there's certain sort of fundamental questions when it comes to the actual inner workings of like how the technology works. And I work in very, very technical industries. I mean, energy healing would be, I'm very like that's sort of a more human sounding
Yeah.
field than a lot of the fields I work in. But ultimately, like I don't, it actually is not good if I have too much information. I need to have
Good
just
point.
the right information that I can sense the story and pull it out, but not too much information that I get lost in the weeds. So I don't know. I also, as I think when I was doing this earlier, I probably got more information. At this point, I've been doing this long enough that I can see patterns pretty
Yeah.
early, and so I can help people get clear faster than I used to be able to.
Well, and they have all the information. Your job is to kind of pull it out of them anyway, right? Like, and so you
Yeah,
don't really need to know too
yeah,
much.
yeah.
And the interesting thing about like the energy healer, like I just mentioned, for example, is like that's such an intangible thing that it's harder versus like I have somebody else that's like they manage conflict in the workplace. Like that, there's a linear path. It makes sense. But the more emotional, it's just the intangible. It's hard to put. But for some
But
reason,
I
people
think
love
you
it.
said something. I think you said something that's important is you said it's more emotional.
Yeah.
It's like, and to me, those are the easiest stories to tell because
Hmm.
think about the word energy healing, right? Like just
Hmm.
take that as an example. As soon as you hear the word healing, what you're getting at is there's somebody who needs to be healed. There's somebody
Yeah.
who's sick, or there's somebody who's in pain, or there's somebody who is depressed, or whatever it is, right? And that's something you feel. And so if you can tell a story that connects to people's emotions, it's much easier for them to understand the story. Like without knowing the energy healer, I would imagine that, we all suffer from certain pain that we think we go to a doctor, or we think that like we can solve it with our diet, right? But there's something that isn't working, right? And actually one of the things we're missing is we're not focusing on our energy. And so
Yeah.
as an energy healer, what I do is I help people get in touch with the things that they're not able to understand because it's not part of Western science or Western medicine, and actually get in touch with those things so they can move to a better place. So
Damn,
that like,
Sarah, you're good.
but like I didn't know, like I don't know
Yeah.
anything, right? Nothing. All you said was energy healer. So like
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing, and then you just fill in. I'm sure I got that wrong, but then you just fill in the correct like facts, and then you tell a good story.
Yeah. So then, in terms of like, because you mentioned earlier when we talked about the anxiety of it and all those things, like, you mentioned some steps that people could take to kind of not, I don't want to say use the word overcome it, but like get past it so they can actually show up. And because the thing that I would imagine as well, the anxiety I don't think ever goes away. Like as a Neanderthal like me, like I present differently, right? So I still compete in jiu-jitsu and those things on the external for when I do for the workplace. But that I've been competing since I was like 10 years old, and it's still nerve-wracking, right, to show up in that way. It never goes away. You just get really good at accepting it, I think is the better thing. So again, what are some things that you can kind of help us with in the acceptance of the anxiety of presenting?
So, my approach to this is it's a little different than acceptance. I have to think about where acceptance fits into this, but I
Also,
my
if it doesn't, like,
so
you
I'll
just
tell
go
you,
like,
yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
my
it's okay.
approach is that the reason why we get so anxious when we speak in front of a group is we feel the sensation of the eyes watching us, and we feel very, as I said, we feel very exposed. And so what it ends up doing is it's a very self-focused experience. We're thinking about, do they like me? Am I going to make a mistake? What is everyone thinking of me? So it's very focused on the eyes on you, right? Which is exactly not what you want to be doing when you're actually trying to help an audience. What you want to be doing is focusing on them because
Mm,
they're the ones who actually need your information, and you are actually not important. You're there to give them the information. They're the ones who actually need to do something with the information. And so what I try to help people do is shift the energy away from what are people thinking about me and put it on how can I help the person in the room. And once you go into helping mode, so it's like shifting your brain from performance mode to helping mode and harnessing your generosity. Once you're in helping mode, as you know, then you're not thinking about yourself anymore, and you become much less nervous. And of
mm.
course you become a better speaker because you're helping the audience. So it's not exactly like accepting my anxiety and like I have to work with my anxiety. It's more like it's not coming this way, it's going out this way.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. And I think that the language of acceptance, I guess that we're saying the same things, just a little bit different. That, like, for example, when I say acceptance, it's like, yeah, I'm anxious, but what now? And then the what now is let's focus on the audience. Because I think what people do
Interesting.
sometimes
Yeah.
with things like with things like anxiety, for example, and now granted, the stakes are a little bit higher. Like in my past life, I was a professional MMA fighter, so I used to
Oh,
literally
that's
be
so
half naked
cool.
in a cage and let like so there's violence, like I could really get hurt, right? So I had to overcome that fear, and so the way that I did was like, yeah, like things could happen, but also what's happening right in this exact moment, and this right
Yes.
exact moment is I'm just gonna show up. Like I've already committed to walk, and then once the thing
Yeah.
closes, the same thing is with public speaking. And again, I don't have that much experience with it, other than like my workshops and stuff. But what was fascinating was, we held a workshop for our coaches and consultants, and it's information that I know, like the back of my head. back in my hand. I've talked about it a billion times, and I know all these people. There's no strangers in the audience. They're all my clients, and there's like 20, 30 people there. And I get up there and I'm nervous. I'm like, wait, what the hell is going on? Like, I was like, I've done this a million times. And it was just fascinating because there was a transition from virtual. I met these people for the first time in person.
Yeah.
At this
Yeah, yeah.
And
that
so it
makes
was
sense.
interesting. Like, it was a new kind of energy. And then, but again, it was like the reframing of, oh, I'm not anxious. I'm not scared. I'm excited.
Yes, and that's a great reframe to go from anxious to excited. I love that reframe. The thing I would say though is the what I'm talking about, the reframe from everyone's looking at me to how can I help the audience, starts from the moment you start preparing for the presentation. So
Yeah.
you prepare, everything you do is prepared, is helping you help the audience. And so by the time so then like what often happens with my clients is then, because they come to me when they have a lot of speaking anxiety. And so I teach them how to prepare for presentations in this way. And so we're focused on helping the audience. And then it comes time for the presentation, right? And just what happens, what you said happens, right? Because their brain is used to experiencing presentations in a scary way, they get really nervous. And at that point, that's when you remind yourself, this is not about me. This is about helping my audience. And that's what I think it's that what now piece that you talked about. That's the reframe. It's like, okay, I feel nervous. It's not about me. I'm here to help my audience. And I'll tell you, though I've been doing this for so many years and I never really got that nervous speaking in public anyway, I still have to remind myself of that every single time I get up to speak because my brain is telling me it's about me. Every time I have to remind myself.
Well, I think I love that you mentioned it from the preparation stage of it. Because again, like for example, I made a great mistake in this last workshop I did in that I created a presentation, it was pretty decent in terms of like the story. There was a story involved and whatever, but the information was too in-depth almost. And looking back, I think my ego got in the way and I made it about me. Like I wanted to look smart. Like I wanted to look like I know it. But when it got done, when I look at the results, and the results meaning like how many of them took action on it, it was like 0. So obviously it wasn't that effective. So did I make it about, I made it about me. Instead of, I think if I started with the preparation, in the preparation phase of, okay, how can the intention is to get them to take action on this. I think I would have done that presentation significantly differently.
That's it. You said it. Exactly. Yeah. I see that all the time. And it's very high, it feels very high stakes because especially when you feel like you want to impress your audience, like if you're presenting to leadership.
Imagine like to the board, like
exactly, right? And so you feel like I don't want them to think I'm a fraud. I don't want them to think I haven't prepared. And so then what ends up happening is you give way too much information, and then nothing really happens. Whereas you start by thinking about, wait a minute, what does my audience need? And I talk a lot about what I call the unspoken need of the audience, which is like what's at stake for them. And it often is things around risk. Like I don't want to fail, or I feel very responsible for something, or I don't want to look stupid in front of someone else. Those are often the unspoken needs. And if you can start with that, you build your presentation around that. It saves you a lot of time. And then it's so much more helpful to your audience than if you just are trying to impress them with your, not with your knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's a really good kind of like key of this is like, I think about, there's a guy named Joe Polish who wrote a book called What's in It for Them. And that's the whole book, right? He's a marketer and he's a really outstanding networker. He built a mastermind, but his mastermind, which is like $25,000 or $100,000 a year to be in, it literally starts from the premise of what's in it for that person. And so if we have that intention going into the presentation or whatever, because I even thinking about too, like to your point, when I was back in the day when I was in corporate and I had to meet with the CEO and give him my ideas for sales and whatever, there was a lot, and I was young when I was like 25. What did I do? I filled it with shit that I thought maybe looked smart. Here's the data. I gave him and at the end of the day, I'm like looking back, it's like now that I'm a CEO, I'm like, I wouldn't want any of that information. I don't give a shit about any of that. Just tell me the story. What's going on? It's brilliant. What do you think about presentation in this new world of like virtual? Because obviously I looked at your website, and one of the services is like virtually presenting, because a lot of like people nowadays, especially I think of sales, like I did a workshop a long time ago with SAP, and they had this weird transition where they're used to doing everything in person, but now they're having to do everything through Zoom. It's a totally different sales thing. So what are your thoughts on, the more that we're going to this hybrid model, specifically for sales presentations? Like, what advice or what thoughts do you have around that?
Well, I just want to go back to something you said a couple questions ago, where you said that it was a little hard for you to go from virtual to being in person. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because for a lot of people, virtual speaking is safer because they don't have to be they don't feel as watched or as exposed, because there's like a wall. Like a lot of what helps people who are nervous about speaking is putting up walls. And one of the walls because you put up a wall to protect yourself, right? An example of a wall is if you're like not looking at your audience, or you're looking at your slide, you're reading from your slide, right? These are all walls. Virtual is also a wall. And the problem with that is like the exact thing you need to do when you're virtual is break down the wall, because you need to, you and I right now are much farther apart from each other than we were if we were in the room together, right? It's a very different experience. And if I'm going to connect to you, I need to try to overcompensate for the fact that I'm not in the room with you. So I need to use more emotionally connected language. I need to interact with you more. I need to use my face more. I need to use silence more, right? And so what we do, but the problem with virtual is that we do the opposite, is because we feel like we're farther away, we speak like we're farther away. And so we use less emotionally connected language, and we ramble more. We have trouble finishing our thoughts. And so as a coach, to teach people how to speak virtually, what I'm teaching them how to do is how to overcompensate for the fact that you're not in the room, and work harder to connect with your audience.
Yeah. And again, for, those that are listening, I mean, what's really cool about this is that it's not just about the corporate, pitch kind of thing. It's also, again, this translates over to things like LinkedIn Live, for example, right? Because like you have to keep people engaged and also interact. And granted, again, when I started doing virtual workshops, I didn't know how to do it. So I went like straight up like hardcore coach mode, and was like, because I had to manage the room. So it was like, I saw a bunch of people with their cameras off. I was like, cameras on. I need to see you. And then the whole time I'm like scanning faces, and then, oh, I see you. You're not paying attention. And I would call people out, because I was like, it wasn't even about going back to, I didn't make it about the audience, to be honest with you. I needed the energy. You know what I mean? Like I needed to feel it. And if I wasn't feeling it, I'd go, hey, am I losing you guys? Because you're not paying attention. You're halfway asleep. Like, what's going on? And I would call them up by name. But that was my way of trying to get that physical feeling still, because virtual is kind of difficult. And also the one thing that you have to manage, and I like the concept of overcompensating for certain aspects, is like from the sales perspective, it's hard. If in person is like the way to sell, right? If you have the option of going in person, phone, be there. Because the hard part is, and again, as somebody that all of my clients are not here, except for one actually, but all of them for the most part are not here in Arizona. So I'm on a call with them, and I'm like, we're pitching them this idea of the way that their brand should go. And I can't, they're excited, they say, but like, I can't feel it. You know what I mean? Like, is that real? Are you just saying you like the strategy? Like, got to give me more. So sometimes it's like, I feel like that insecure, like boyfriend, like, do you like me? You know what I mean? Like,
well, that's, but if you notice, that's the pattern, right? Because you also needed to like think that you were like, turn your camera on, pay attention to me, look at me, look at me. Yeah. It's good to own that. Yeah. But it's hard. It's hard to know. It's hard to be able to understand whether someone's excited when they're virtual. It's so much harder. It's like, it's much, much harder. But we can be doing it better than we are.
And not that much too, I don't think this hybrid model is going to go anywhere. Like, it's going to be, I think for the most part, a lot of companies are getting back in person, but still, I don't think it's, especially for sales, it's like, you could reach anyone anywhere. So it's like, it's going to be hard to get away from.
And the technology will get better so that it will become more real life. Like I went through a period for a while where I've sort of stopped for a while, but I got very into virtual reality
Mhm.
as the next way that we would be doing these meetings. I mean, it is so much more compelling to meet someone in virtual reality than it is to meet someone on Zoom. Like there's no comparison. And the example I always go back to is I was working with a few VR companies and I did a meeting with one of them, and it took the meeting like took place like in the Alps, like at this really cool outdoor meeting space. And literally I feel I remember, oh, I think I'm frozen. Do you see me? Okay, there I are. But we hope you can got that. So
Yeah.
literally, I feel like I remember that experience. Like I have this memory of being on this rooftop in the Alps having this meeting with these people. Like it's bizarre, right? Because I was physically there in VR,
Hmm.
and you just can never get that on Zoom. And so I just think that because you're right that hybrid is here to stay, people are going to come up with more and more ways to make it feel like you're in the room.
Man, you're so right when it comes to like the experience of the meeting itself. Like I think back to like again, I think back to I've had dozens of hundreds of sales calls on Zoom, but the ones that really stick out to me are the ones that I met them in person because I can remember the food we ate.
Right.
I remember the drinks we got.
Yeah.
Like I remember like there is one in particular I'm thinking about
Love it.
like that we sat I because he's a restaurant consultant, and so he's telling me about the way that they
Now
make
you're
money. He's
frozen for
telling me
me.
about why the drinks that they chose and all these things. But I remember it's so funny because I've had, again, I don't remember any of my sales calls, but that one I remember because of the experience of being in the place.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
It is. It is. Our memories are 3D, right? We need to be somewhere in order to remember things. And, which is why we remember our dreams, because our dreams are in 3D because our brains take us to a place where we're like having an experience, a full experience. It's not a flat experience. Zoom is flat. And so we have to
Yeah.
do our best right now to infuse it with three dimensionality through emotion and, you know, varying our voices and all the things we try to do, but fundamentally it's not going to work. Like this is not going to be 5 years from now. We're not going to be meeting like this. I can pretty much guarantee
Man.
it.
Well, I love this talk because I had so many interesting ideas now where it's like, for example, how can we make it a little bit more 3D? Well, imagine if, especially if it's planned ahead enough, what if you sent them something physical? So
Like a
that way,
prop.
as they're like not a prop, but like let's say a box of different things, and
Yeah.
then that way it's like don't open until we have this
Oh, I
presentation,
like that. I like
and
that.
then it's like, and then there's engagement happening, and then they're gonna fucking remember that, Sarah.
You know what?
You know
That's
what
a
I mean?
great idea. If you're selling them something, that is a brilliant idea, and I want to like blog about it and cite you. If you're selling someone something, send them the item in advance and tell them not to open it until you're in the meeting with them, and then they will remember the meeting. You're totally
Yeah.
right. You are totally right. It's a great idea.
Because think about it, right? Like, especially, I always say this, but like, there's a billion of us out there in terms of what you do. There's a billion, presentation coaches out there. There's a billion and one podcast agency. There's a billion of us. So how can you stand out and be different?
That's right.
Like, and so like, out of all the pitches that I've ever gotten to me, no one's ever sent me something before the presentation before.
Exactly. Until now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now I'm
exactly.
thinking. You got me
Well,
thinking,
here's
Sarah. I
the
like this.
question, Raylan. What can you send them?
So it would be, I think the way that I think is like, okay, so you know how, okay, let's just use the podcast agency as an example. Okay, so a lot of what we do is before the meeting even starts. They're called strategy meetings.
Hmm.
So I'm already planning out because I'm crazy, and once I meet somebody, like I'm already thinking about their podcast and how it would work and what kind of guests would they be on, and then how
Hmm.
that translates into their offer. So basically, what we would do is, let's say, for example, you and I book a meeting, and we book it for like 2 weeks from now. Um, Basically, my team and I have 2 weeks to, we meet one day, we come up with the graphics and all that, and we could print it out, even if it's just a printout of the PDF of the brand image of the podcast, and almost visualize the future of what it could look like. And then even it's like, I know one of your goals, for example, could be like, I want to work with like this Fortune 50 company. Well, on there, I'll show you, like, we would take like almost like a Photoshop even, and have you at that company, right? And then talking about your podcast, like whatever. And just to give the visual of the future. Because here's the thing to me, on the sales side of it, is I think the reason why people say no, or maybe I'm going to hold off on it, is they can't see the vision.
Yeah.
Like they're struggling to see
Yeah.
the connection, because like I have the vision in my head.
Yeah.
And it's like, I know how far this can go for you, but if I can paint it. So I think like even if you started with the PDF, but imagine too, it's like you painted, because I really love Cameron Herold's book called Vivid Vision. And one of the things you do is you can help them paint their vivid vision, for example. And let's say, for example, it's like in the intake form before the sales call. What's your favorite smells? If you had a headquarters, what would it look like? What would it smell like? And then you would literally take a close enough thing and put like a smelling thing in the box, right? So when they open it, it's like, that's the vision. Anyway, I'm going crazy with this right now, but I'm just saying these are like, because even too, like, think about it from the perspective of like, we write handwritten thank you cards to all of our clients.
Yeah.
Nobody does that.
I know.
Okay. Like,
I know.
not saying nobody, but very few people. And out of all the things we've done for clients, that's the one thing they always talk about.
Right. And it's because it's both personal and it's three-dimensional. Like that's the golden combination. Wait, but yeah, I'm still, and I want to think more about what you can send people.
Listen,
I love it.
Sarah, I just pulled that idea out of my ass. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I think it's something. Like,
Yeah,
there's
we'll
something
talk about
there.
that.
And it
We'll
could
talk
be
about that
something
more, because I have some ideas for you. Yeah. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, that's our time.
Okay.
And look how fast it goes. See? I told you. It's going to fly by.
It
Any
was
final
fun.
thoughts? Any final thoughts you want to throw to the audience before we jump out of here? All of your stuff will be in the description, for people to check out and go do that. Do you have anything else that you wanted to kind of mention to the audience?
I think I would just say that speaking can be more fun. That it's even in very technical fields, very, where it feels like it's very serious, very dry, that it's the moment, you can see it as the moment where you're actually have an opportunity to have human connection, and to get people to be excited about an idea that you're sharing. And that can be fun. And that, it doesn't have to be anxiety producing. It doesn't have to be such incredibly hard work, and it doesn't have to be boring. So that's what I would say.
Well, again, we got tons of ideas. And I think, again, this is your idea. You can take it, give it to your clients. I just gave you like $1 million idea. There you go. It's yours. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Sarah, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Raylan.